To begin, my name is Richard Garner, and on behalf of the U of T Multi-Faith Center, who's a co-sponsor of tonight's event, as well as the One Network, organizer Lakshmi Kumar, who you'll see buzzing around here as people continue to arrive, Richard from the Multi-Faith Center just rolling in as well, and also on behalf of our guests, Dan Barker and Dr. Sankara. We'd like to welcome everybody for coming down here to be part of what we hope is an engaging, thought-provoking, compelling conversation. You'll notice we're probably going to try to steer away from the word debate as much as possible, although I think it'll ultimately be a debate. But we're at least in spirit, we'd like this to be as much of a conversation and a dialogue rather than two people, sort of attacking each other and defending positions. So in the spirit of open-mindedness and dialogue, I think our two participants tonight couldn't agree more that there's probably room for some dialogue rather than debate. And I know that the Multi-Faith Center also shy away from the word debate and opt for dialogue, and I think that's what we're looking for tonight. So you'll notice that the sort of umbrella subject matter tonight is science and God, friends or foes. We went back and forth on that a lot, Lakshmi and myself, and sort of tonight's event is actually a result of conversations that we were having really about quantum physics, I think, and specifically I think the search for the Higgs boson or God particle at the Large Hadron Collider. And, in talking about his work with Dr. Sankara and other people that were sort of, we both sort of follow, we were talking about how the lines have been blurred in the last X amount of years between, two sides that were always sort of at odds, which was, black and white, science, religion, science and God. And in some people's estimation, those lines are not only getting blurred, what once sort of proved or debunked the existence of God or religion, in some circles, people feel that there's actually a case being made through science for the existence of, whether it be spirituality or God or whatever you want to call it. And this is always where vocabulary falls short. So that's the framework of the conversation we're going to try to have tonight with two people who have pretty extensive backgrounds, not only in their chosen fields, but in they're multifaceted, to say the least. I'll start with both of our guests came from a long way. One from Madison, Wisconsin. One from India. I'll start with Madison, Wisconsin, and I'll introduce both of you, and then we can come up at the same time. But so a man whose life journey has taken him down many paths. His relationship with God and Jesus Christ started at a very early age, 15 years old. He was a street preacher, loud and proud, as I understand. I know that some of the stories that you told, that you were the guy that people didn't want to sit beside on the bus back in the day. Yes, he combined his love for Jesus Christ with a love for music, and is a very, very accomplished musician. Was in certainly the sort of Christian music circles, but still is today, and still getting royalties off some of the stuff produced even 20 years ago. But at some point, something changed, and after more than 20 years on a certain path, he started to waver, and after a 5-year deconversion period, his words, he went from devout to devoid of any further identification, not only with religion, but with God, Jesus Christ, and pretty much anything that fell into that category. He became a staunch atheist and has been as passionate about preaching the gospel of no gospel as he once was about the Word of God. He's appeared on everything from Oprah to Maury Povich. And I understand you weren't the father, so that's good. But yes, please welcome Dan Barker. And as mentioned, our other guest for tonight's esteemed panel, also came from a long way and has actually been in Toronto for about a week. Is going to be traveling to Chile, to Mexico City, and Brazil on this particular trip, holding workshops about self-realization, and has a long history as well. And obviously, if you're here today in this particular context, your life has taken many turns. Going back as far as 1982, Dr. Sankara was a receiver of the esteemed fellowship, the Humboldt Fellowship, and was in Germany. I understand after your wedding, it became a extended honeymoon for 2.5 years, working as a theoretical physicist and a nuclear physicist. Very few people can actually say that. And always a spiritual man, has actually been a devotee and studied under people like J. Krishnamurti in India and other masters, but got a calling, if you will, and I'll let Dr. Sankara expand on that, and has devoted the last 12 years of his life to researching, among other things, Vedic astrology, and is an esteemed Hindu spiritualist who can speak about many different subjects. And you'll all get a sampling of that tonight. So let's welcome to the stage Dan Barker and Dr. Sankara.
Thank you. Thank you.
I forgot my water.
Namaste.
So how does it, mics work, yes?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Perfect. So yes, those are the intros, and like we said, we're going to have a dialogue tonight. We're kind of set up like we're in the living room. But before we get started, I know it is part of the sort of more traditional debate format. Opening statements are usually what we call them, but let's just say we'll start with each of our guests tonight just giving you a little background on themselves, why they're here, how they got here, and what they're all about. And Dan, why don't we start with you?
We were sitting down front together before, and I had my coffee, and Sankara asked me, "What are you drinking?" And I'm saying, "This is coffee. This is my religion." and he turned to me and he said, "My religion is hot chocolate."
Problem solved.
So here we go. So we know we have a direct quote from the master, or whatever you call yourself. Hot chocolate. I guess that could be another debate, right?
Yeah, phase 2 of the debate series, hot chocolate versus coffee.
So, well, thank you all. Thank you, Richard and Lakshmi, who did all the work. And Richard gets all the credit because I've communicated mostly with Lakshmi. And wherever Elsa is, thanks for the drive. It was really a pleasure to be here. And as you know, I'm an American. I'm from Wisconsin. Don't hold that against me. I am a true American in the sense that my father, and therefore I, belong to a Native American tribe. We're part of the Lenape Indian tribe, which used to own, we're a very smart tribe of Indians. We sold Manhattan to the Dutch for $24. So my brothers and I want to go back and get it back. My family turned Christian. You know, most of it happens in most countries that the invading religion comes in and takes everything, takes the land, takes the buffalo, takes the resources, but it gives them the Bible or the religion. And so we became Christianized. And something like that happened in your country, you know, with the British and all that. But and so I was raised Christian, and I thought it was the most wonderful. I was so lucky to be born in the right family, the right religion, the right time of history, because Jesus was coming any moment according to the Bible. I was so lucky to have been born into the truth, into the true culture of the truth. And I preached for 19 years before I finally changed my mind, and am now absolutely convinced there is no good reason to believe in a God. None. There's no good evidence for a God. There's no good argument for a God. There's no coherent definition of a God. There's no agreement among believers about the nature or moral principles of this God. There's no good reply to the problem of evil. And there's no need for a God. Millions, hundreds of millions of good people on this planet do not believe in a God. And we live happy, moral, productive lives, meaningful lives, peaceful, joyful lives, lives of emotion, lives of purpose, lives of love, lives of family, without the belief in some supernatural ghost or spirit or whatever we want to call it. But as I was saying about my Native American heritage, we were on this continent at least 12,000 years ago, maybe 15,000, a long time, long before Hindu civilization, as you know it, even was thought of. You know, Jyotisha goes back to maybe 2,000 years or 1,500 years, whatever. And just suppose I were to tell you that one of my Native American ancestors was talking through me and said, Sankara, my name is Sukalan Ahas. I existed thousands of years ago. I am the person who created Shiva because the world has a problem. I created Shiva. And I also created the other gods. I created Ixtaccíhuatl and Quetzalcoatl, and I also created Tyr and Odin and Thor and Frigg, and I created, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I created all these gods because the world is sick. The world has a malady. The world has an illness, and I needed to create these gods. And for the Indian subcontinent, I created a god called Shiva, who is to be your guide to get to, what do you call it, moksha? To go to that. So that you could be guided out of that illness. Maybe that explains why Columbus called us Indians. You ever thought of that? You know, he mistakenly called us Indians. So we are both Indians in a sense. The reason I created Shiva was for your benefit, so that you could take this journey to the top of the mountain. But what you don't know, and what Hindu civilization doesn't know, what Shiva doesn't even know, that's only half of the journey. It's just the half. You get to the peak to total abnegation of self. You get to that place where you've totally surrendered and emptied yourself of yourself. You get to that peak. That's only half the journey, Sankara. There's the other side of the mountain. You're going to come down to the other side, full circle, and discover what your true nature is, the real truth, for those who have eyes to see. The real truth of reality is that you are an animal. I am an animal. We are, as you write in your some of your writings, puny biophysical organisms, which is a compliment. We are indeed puny biophysical organisms, and that is wonderful. That is enough. That's more than enough, because who we truly are. And when you pass that point of enlightenment, and when you get past over that peak and you come back down, you're going to arrive full circle and stop denying your true human nature, stop pretending that there's something transcendent, stop imagining that there's some illusion or delusion of a transcendent world, and rejoin the human race as the animals that we are, the proud, glorious, puny animals that we are. And for those of us who don't believe in a God, we don't need to make that journey. It's because the world is sick, as you say. The world has been infected with an illness that needs to be cured, and that illness that has infected the world is religion. All over the planet, on your subcontinent, in Europe, in Africa, all over the planet, this religious idea has infected our species with this malady that we need to be cured from. And you will be once you pass that enlightenment and get out of yourself to see yourself from a new perspective and see that we are animals. We are biophysical organisms. So you will be purged of that religion when you get to that point. So since I created gods, since we animals created the gods, we can uncreate the gods and rejoin our true human nature. Okay, now, that's a joke, okay? That didn't really happen. I'm not really saying that, right? But do you believe it? Do you think it was true, what I just said? Do you think there's some merit to this message from my ancestors to you?
You're suggesting certainly a certain stand in philosophy. You are paving the ground for your debate.
But do you believe that story, yes or no?
I do not believe that story. I have a different version of the story which I will present as I begin to talk.
Well, good. Well, that's good. I'm glad you said that, because you'd be crazy to believe that story, right? You do demonstrate that you are, and I'll finish my opening in just a minute. You are a skeptic when it comes to my story. You are correctly scientific and critical when it comes to analyzing the story that I just told you. I'm glad you're smart enough and scientific enough to express that skepticism and that doubt to that crazy story that I just told you. By the way, could be true, you never know. I mean, really, it couldn't it? It could be true. Maybe I'm telling you that it's a joke so that I'm hiding the truth from you. But in any event, I applaud you. I congratulate you for having the intelligence, the scientific integrity to be skeptical of the story that I just told you. And I'm sure you will understand that for the very same reason, I am skeptical of the stories that you believers tell me. For very good scientific, critical, observational reasons, because they cannot all be true, all of these stories. They can all be false. So tonight's debate, is there science and God, friends or foes? It's a little bit of a misleading topic, Richard, because it assumes that there is a God. You're right? It assumes that is God and science a friend or a foe? It assumes that there is a God.
Well, I think we were looking for the idea of science versus the idea of God, but sure, yeah. I mean, there was no presupposition necessarily that there is a God, but certainly to your point, we're at this place where, you know, since the Age of Enlightenment, science disproved God, and there are people arguing today that might
that's
not
fine.
be the case.
I'm not arguing with the topic. I'm just pointing out that there's an assumption buried in that there is actually a God who could be a friend or a foe to science.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Many people are convinced that science indeed has disproved God, because if a God existed, the universe would be different than if a God did not exist. And one of the ways that science has disproved God is through repeated tests of astrology, including Hindu astrology. When Hindu astrology predictions are put to the test, they do no better than random chance. When you take all of the tests, in fact, you know the big study out of Pune that happened in 2008, with Narlikar, you know that study that happened? Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not. You can tell me what that is.
Oh, okay. Well, it was the big study of Hindu astrology at Pune in, what's the state? Maharashtra.
Yes.
And 27 astrologers, Hindu astrologers, with average of 14 years experience each, volunteered to say, okay, we have the truth, we are making these horoscope predictions. They submitted to that, they all took it, and they did, some of them did like 51, 52%, when you should expect 100. Some of them did 47, 46%. On average, none of the Hindu astrologers were able to perform by observation any better than random chance. I could flip a coin and do just as well as a horoscope, and that is a scientifically proven fact after survey, study after study, mostly in the West. There's hundreds of studies done in the West, but in India, in fact, one of the leading Indian astrological societies volunteered to examine all 200 of those cases, and they actually came up at 52%. They did the best, but still that's about the same statistically. So
we should be segueing to opening statements from Dr. Sankara. I just wanted to make sure that you are...
Well, I'll close with one extra point here. I think most religious people are good people. I admire the work of most religious people. But on balance, religion, I think, is doing more harm than good. All of us do good. Atheists do good. Hindus do good. Muslims do good. But on balance, the world is better off without irrationality, without false teachings, without this idea of subservience to a master. We're better off thinking for ourselves, opening our real animal eyes, which is the true eyes that we do have, and stop pretending that there's something imaginary in the world. So science and God, if you use science, which is observation, science means observing and testing. We do not only do not find God, but we also find good reasons to show that the God as proposed by most of the major religions not only does not exist, but cannot exist.
Well, I'm starting to believe, though, that we might have proof tonight that God not only exists, but God is not happy with your opening statements. Because I've been hearing, I don't know about you, but I've been hearing rumblings this entire time.
Okay, very good.
And I'm not sure what that is, but...
That's good. That means they're listening.
I'm going to guess that it can't be the subway. Yes, Dr. Sankara.
Thank you, Mr. Richard Garner. First of all, I have to express my gratitude to Mr. Richard Garner, director of the One Network, and who has set up this program, who's been kind enough to accommodate Mr. Dan Barker and myself. And then I like to thank my friend, my young friend, Mr. Lakshmi Kumar, who has conceived this idea and organized it in collaboration with Mr. Richard Garner. Then I have to thank the director of the Multi-Faith Center, Mr. Richard Chambers, who has been magnanimous in sponsoring this program in collaboration with One Network. And I thank all of you who have come here and who are interested in the theme we are going to dialogue about this evening. And the first thing that both of us, Mr. Dan Barker and myself, have got to take note is that we have got to have as our primary concern your well-being, that we both will not make irresponsible, speculative, and fanciful statements. We have got to be very precise and focused and sharp in our thinking, and if possible, carry you forward in the dialogue, giving you ample space so that you think along with us, you examine the thesis that we present, and you arrive at a conclusion which appears legitimate and correct to you. We are not interested, neither of us is obviously interested in converting you to our philosophical position, but we just want to present a whole lot of data before you so that you have all the time and these 2 hours to do some deep and profound contemplation of these issues. Now, I'm also indebted to my former host, the Bharati family, and to my present host, Mrs. Vijaya Charan Kumar Bomireddy and Mr. Charan Kumar Bomireddy, and also Ms. Vasugi Paramasivam, who has been helping us a lot to get going with these programs. My thesis will be, actually I'm here sitting in this chair not because I had a desire to debate with Mr. Dan Barker, who has arrived at the inferential station of atheism. He has made an analysis of religions and theology, and he has come to an inference that the religions are having a more pernicious effect than a benevolent influence on mankind, and that God has proved to be such a domineering tyrant, subjugating us, humiliating us, giving us the burdens of guilt and sin, that we want to break loose from him, that we no more need his mercy, that we can go it alone. Now, I want to challenge that stand, and I want to challenge every conclusion, every analytical position Mr. Dan Barker will take, not because I see him in an adversarial role, not at all. I have taken a liking to him, and I think Mr. Dan Barker is a very good human being, which is the most important thing in life after all. But my interest is in creating evidence for the existence of God and how we go about in the quest for God, and what is the sadhana or the preparation and the effort we will have to invest and put in order to make this first-hand discovery of God ourselves. Mr. Dan Barker is primarily concerned about belief in God, and before coming here, because my friend Mr. Lakshmi Kumar suggested to me that I dialogue with Mr. Dan Barker, I said I must know something of Mr. Dan Barker's work before I accept this proposal. So I started reading, I made a Xerox copy of Mr. Dan Barker's work, and I read the first 100 pages. I enjoyed reading Mr. Dan Barker's work, and regret that I could not finish the work because I didn't have sufficient time. And I consider him to be a very truthful person, and as he explains in his book, he loves truth, he loves intelligence, he loves analysis, and these are the three main lights in his life. And which is the reason I agreed to dialogue with Mr. Dan Barker. And my position will be made clear as this dialogue unfolds. My intention is to place before you evidence and a philosophy of life and a theology of life and a path to God realization that each of us will have to check out and work out for yourselves. I want you to be aware that when I first got this connection to God, I was in a state where thought was minimally active. This was in the year 1973. And I consciously refrained from using the word God for 8 years. All my friends at the coffee table would discuss God through an intellectual debate, and I would be silent. I had a direct first-hand experience of God, but I would not bring it to the tea table. I would not make it a point of intellectual debate, because it became clear to me, unless each one has this experience and this conviction and this inner journey, nobody, not even God, can convince you that you deserve to go on that path, that you ought to go on that path, that it will be salutary for you to go on that path. Nobody can convince you, not even God. So this happened to me, and the man of God in India, generally, he will not say that he is a man of God. And in that sense, the statement I'm making that I had this experience, I would not normally make. But in order for you to get a clear idea of where I'm coming from, I am revealing certain facts about my life from you. Now, if you ask me, the God that you touched base with, can that God convert this planet Earth into the planet Jupiter? Then I like to tell you straight away that my God will not be able to do that. My God has performed a number of marvelous, what you call miracles, and this is a connection and a communion. Each of us will have to come upon, work on, and discover in the sanctity of our hearts. It's not even a thing to be spoken about. And Mr. Dan Barker, as I see, because I read the first 100 pages of his book, I want to first of all salute him for being a very heroic individual in having shrugged off religious authority, which was proving to be more a curse than a blessing. Because that religious authority had given him a huge burden of guilt and sin and never gave a nice feeling about himself. So he felt disappointed by the second coming of Christ. He felt belittled. And when that is the case, for a Christian evangelical teacher to actually make a complete turnaround of 100 degrees and say that I do not want to be a hypocrite, I want to walk out of the whole thing and begin my life afresh. I think if we are fair to our conscience, we can admit that not even 1 in a million will take the step which Mr. Dan Barker has taken. For that reason, I consider this a very heroic step, and I salute him. But I do not agree with his inferences leading to the final inferential station of atheism. And I'm here to challenge the logic, the methodology, the methods of analysis. That will be my line of approach.
Okay, and that's maybe an opportunity for me to interject here and And obviously what we're talking about here, it's not a small issue, as we all know. It's hard to get consensus with 4 people ordering a pizza, let alone we're talking about the most, important question that will ever face humanity. So I don't think anybody's silly enough to believe that we're going to walk out of here tonight with an about-face 180-degree turn on wherever we started. Unfortunately, that happens very seldom. But one of the things I'd like to try to clear up from the outset, and to keep the train on the tracks, so to speak, is the issue around semantics, God and religion. Because I think one of the things you're implying is that the history and the legacy of Dan Barker's background is that his deconversion was from, first of all, Christianity. So not God, but a particular sect of religion, and that the problems and ultimately the stance is versus the institutions of religion. And I know from talking to you outside of here that there's a big separation for most people, or for some people, between whether it be quote-unquote God, and for some people, that word doesn't work. Whether it's the source, whether it's the unified field, as Einstein talked about. But as far as if somebody was to ask you, is your position as an atheist more about and more against the institutionalized religions of humanity, or is it specifically and singularly versus the idea of a creator?
Well, in my case, it was purely the intellectual question of whether a God exists or not. The Bible was a big part of that. I first had to climb out of that hole. And I'm not opposed in principle to the institution of religion, because I think some religious institutions are doing good work. Mm-hmm. I think they're doing good humanistic work, although a lot of them are not. A lot of religions are basically divisive. They're creating an unnecessary source of social conflict in the world. By the way, I don't think the question of God is the most important question facing our species. I think there are more important questions like overpopulation, perhaps. The question of God for us atheists is not that big of a question anymore. Sure. But, it'd be like, what is your position on the flying spaghetti monster? Make up your mind, you know? I mean, it's like, to those of us who don't believe anymore, it's almost like, well, what do you think? Was the big bad wolf a good character or not? Well, it's a character. Mm-hmm. So in our minds, God is a character in a story. Mm-hmm. God, friend or foe, right? And so you can judge that the big bad wolf is a bad character without admitting that that character actually exists in reality. It's a story that the human race tells each other. But for me, the process, it was not emotional, and it was not as much as you characterized it that I was angry or disappointed, I wasn't so much disappointed. I was surprised to realize, oh, Jesus is not coming again. All generations of Christians have preached the second coming and Jesus is coming soon. Even in the Bible, Jesus told his disciples, some of you won't die until you see the kingdom.
But you say, but in all honesty, like as objectively as a robot, can you say that there was zero emotion in that transformation? I mean, you're talking about you committed your life to something for a long period, to the point where you were advocating as strongly as anybody to find out any human being that feels betrayed by some belief. There's usually some component of emotion there.
But the emotion,
of hurt.
You're right, but the emotion was a reaction that came later. The emotion was not a reason. It wasn't like, oh, I'm so mad at how the church treats women or how it discriminates against gays. Mm-hmm. There was none of that. I just wanted the pure question. Later, though, when you're trying to rebuild your life, imagine yourself abandoning Hinduism and telling all your friends and family, it's false, it's a lie, I don't believe it anymore. You might be strong in your conviction, but the social and the emotional impact of your decision would be something hard to deal with. So yes, the emotional part of it was afterward. Now, how do I restructure my mind after years of saying, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus? So that was a tough thing, but it was not a reason.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Dr. Shankar, when you hear something like that, in terms of the background and when we talk about God versus religion, do you believe that atheist position, as you talked about, arriving at that position of
Right.
atheism, is clouded by that sort of semantic problem between those two things?
Yeah, there is a problem of overlap, all right, but first I'd like to cover some ground about fundamental principles.
Sure.
Now, we are talking about religion, and it is a very loaded word. Now, there are the religious institutions which give us a taste of what religion is supposed to be and what it is in reality. Then there are the holy books of a religion which give us a taste of what the religion was and what it currently is. Then we have a taste, more significantly, of what the religion is all about from the lives of the saints and the sages who actually contributed to the religion and who are in fact the lifeblood of the religion. And then there are also a lot of ordinary men and women who belong to religion, who are not big prophets and not anointed saints and anointed sages, but who are functioning like so-called limited human beings. And if we look very closely at them, then we may be inspired that their faith in religion and their anchorage to religion has been an exemplary thing, a salutary thing for themselves and for all the other people with whom they are tied up by the bondage of destiny. So we have got to look at religious institutions, we have got to look at the holy books, we have got to look very significantly at the lives of the saints, the sages, the mystics, the masters, the prophets, and we also have to look at ordinary men and women who are not making tall claims, who are leading their lives in a very simple way, and who are very good, and who are inspired by the religious teaching, and who live good, honest, pious lives which impact beneficially on all their fellow men. So we have got to look at all these areas the moment we use the word religion. And a religious institution may have failed in its mission because a religious institution comes into existence primarily to open the gates to the kingdom of God, or whatever way you want to call it, to reveal the truth and to help you understand the truth, to help you assimilate the truth, not just believe in the truth, graduate from the lowest level of belief to the higher level of faith, from the higher level of faith to the still higher level of understanding, from the higher level of understanding to a devotional adoration of the divine, and then a direct first-hand experience of the divine. So it's not just one level belief. Belief is the most rudimentary, it's the kindergarten of religion, and if we only talk about the level of belief, then I believe we are completely lost, because that is just the stepping stone of religion. From there we have got to get ahead till we come to a direct first-hand discovery of God, and my discovery of God will be unique. It will be entirely different from your discovery of God, which will be again unique. So if million human beings are going to set out on the path of discovering ultimate reality of God, everyone is going to find a unique transcendental power, or the Almighty. And if we compare notes, we will all concur in certain issues and we will all differ in certain things, and that is in the fitness of the transcendental aspect of divinity. There's nothing wrong with it. And my approach will be to look at Mr. Dan Barker's work from the vantage tower of the Hindu spiritual tradition, from the vantage tower of the latest theories in modern physics like quantum mechanics, like quantum field theory, from the vantage tower of Vedic astrology, and from the vantage tower of general assessment of whether all this analysis is indeed true, or it is merely in the nature of a logical construction, logically perfect, but lacking an object, a referential object, which validates the logical construction. So I want to approach Mr. Dan Barker's work in a spirit of friendliness as his friend, and look at it, and I want to share my perceptions with you. That's my viewpoint.
So, and I just want to interject there quickly on that note, because what you're saying, to summarize quickly, at least from my perspective, is that the evidence, so to speak, in the spirit of evidence as being a part of this conversation, is ultimately at the end.
Absolutely.
But the buy-in that's necessary to have a life of devotion, to have one of the rare experiences that you've talked about, that you've had an interface, let's say, with God, for lack of a better description. But that the blind faith, for lack of a better word, that religion often talks about, that in many people's opinions is a crutch for people that are suffering, for people that are poor, for people that have nothing else, for people that want to believe in something for no other reason than to not face the true reality of their lives. The institution of religion, and we all know this, anybody sitting here today, like you said, some institutions have done great things. There is great work being done by institutionalized religion today. But the history is not good. The history is bloody, the history is ugly, the history has been divisive, and the history has been manipulative of that blind faith that people are being asked to have, in some cases that are beyond reproach. How do we reconcile that truth and still expect somebody who's seen the evidence, quote unquote, of the legacy of institutionalized religion, and still ask that person to put that aside, to put everything aside, to put the lack of evidence aside, material evidence, and trust, whether it be you or a saint or somebody else, that interface with God is still at the end of the rainbow?
You see, in Hindu India, the whole quest for God is a matter of a lifetime's journey. You don't do this as a summer crash course. Attend a spiritual retreat of 2 days or 7 days, probably attend it 10 times in your life, and then you think you've got a master's degree in God realization or something like that. Nothing of that sort works. So, first of all, we have to be very compassionate. There are a lot of people in the world whose destiny may not be as fortunate as our destiny has been. So, if our destiny has been very fortunate, and we have very strong intellectual powers and emotional powers, then probably we could have run our lives without at any point making a reference or seeking an anchorage in God as a refuge and as a shelter. But we have to reckon with the fact that there are millions of people in this world whose lives are very painful, very sorrowful. They know not where to turn. The governments are not helping. Their own families may not be helpful. Nobody to help them. And fate is bad, a dreadful disease like cancer or AIDS or something like that. And these people will naturally turn to God, not that they have inquired into God and verified the existence of God and then invested their faith in Him. Not at all. They have done no inquiry. For them, it is just an emotional anchorage, ad hoc anchorage, because they are in a grave crisis and they've been told God is the Almighty, God is the source of all the goodness and all the wonderful blessings in life, so take refuge. So they begin their journey by taking refuge. And I do not see anything wrong in this, so I will certainly not condemn it, because I see it with compassionate eyes. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindus, Krishna, the avatar Krishna said that there are 4 kinds of devotees. Chaturvidha bhajante mam janaha sukrutanarjuna artho artarthi jignasur jnani cha bhartarashabha. That is, there are 4 kinds of devotees. The people who are in profound distress, the category I just mentioned. Then the people who are seekers of wealth, They come to God because they've got very powerful desires, which are like ghosts, which won't let go of them, and they see no way of actually fulfilling those desires through their own human effort. So they run to a deity who is held to be the granter of the blessings for the fulfillment of the desire. So the seekers of wealth and the seekers of prosperity, they are the second category of desires. The third category of desires, into which my esteemed colleague Mr. Dan Barker fits, the intellectually curious people. They're searching, they're intellectually very vigorous, and they're very curious, and I want to know whether God really exists or not. So they are on the quest, they are on a burning quest. They're not able to sleep properly at night. They constitute the third category. And the fourth category is the ones who are called jnanis in India, the knowing ones who had gnosis. They already know the truth of God, the transcendental reality of divinity, but they still remember Him and they anchor to Him because they have that devotional adoration, and they love Him without any ulterior motive. They love Him without any ulterior motive because they know that He is the Father and the Mother. So there are four kinds of devotees, and the world is vast and the world is wide, and we must be magnanimous enough not to admit only some of these devotees as bona fide to get close to God and the other people as belonging to a lesser category. We must give everybody their due place, and with the movement of the wheel of time, as life unfolds, people will graduate from the distressed condition to the seekers of wealth and prosperity. Then from there they'll become intellectually curious, they'll start probing, and then they will probably strike the ground of God through a direct first-hand experience. Then they will still keep Him in their heart because they know what it is all about. It's an ineffable mystery which words cannot touch.
I'm sensing some intellectual curiosity right now.
Maybe we could ask questions of each other.
Sure, please. Yeah, absolutely. Go crazy.
Look like that. Well, there's a fifth category, and that's those of us who are convinced there is no God to even seek in the first place, that it's a waste of time and energy that could be better spent on the real world. And as you talked about the ultimate reality, I told you what the ultimate reality is. You and I are animals. We are biophysical organisms in a natural environment. That is the reality that we both agree exists. But I have a couple questions for you.
Just a minute, Mr. Dan Barker. You might have come to the conclusion that you are an animal.
It's not a conclusion, it's a fact.
No, it's only valid for you. It's only valid for you. It's not valid for everybody sitting here. It's not valid for me at all because I'm a being of light.
But you are an animal. You have a body that eats the same food.
I have a body. The body is just the outer covering, and this is cast off at death.
So what you're saying is that you are an animal plus.
The animal is the outer covering.
So you are an animal.
No.
Yes, you are. You are an animal plus.
I don't accept the tenor, no. In the Hindu world,
you are a biological organism.
You're a physical being as well as a being of light, would that suffice?
No, I'm coming to it.
Okay.
In the Hindu world, we have to understand who man is. Man is not just a bundle of matter. Man is essentially spirit.
But not just, you said.
Just a minute.
You said the word just. Man is a bundle of matter, but not just.
Not just, yes, it's something more.
So you're agreeing that we are a bundle of matter.
That is the first definition. That's not the final definition. We have a body, yes, indisputable. All of us have a body.
Very good.
We drank coffee, and I drank hot chocolate because the belly is asking for it. So that is conceded.
And in that sense, we are animals. Maybe you think there's more.
There's more, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Well, that was my point. At least we agree. In any discussion, we should start with where we both agree, and then if you're making an additional claim above and beyond what we both agree on, then the burden of proof is on you. And that was my two questions I have here. You mentioned evidence, and I've read the writings that either you or Lakshmi sent, and I learned a lot from it about your particular brand of Hinduism, because Hinduism is such a broad, mushy, I mean, there's so many different schools, but I've learned a lot about your particular views, and you're very articulate, you express it well, but through all those writings that I've read of yours, I did not find one scrap of evidence. I found a lot of words, I found a lot of philosophy, I found a lot of talk about God and Kama and Arthur, all these different concepts which are precious to you. But you mentioned earlier about evidence, and so I have two questions for you then. The first question is, and maybe you can answer them both at the same time, show us your evidence. In other words, give us the evidence, put it on the table so we can see and examine your evidence, because if you have a burden of proof of convincing me that your statements are true above and beyond what we both agree, then you must produce that evidence, that actual evidence. And the second part of that same question is, what do you say to the actual scientific fact of repeated surveys that Vedic astrology, Hindu astrology, is a failure? It does not do any better than random chance. That is an observable, testable, repeatable fact of science, including in your own country, studies that you weren't even aware of. Do you have studies that show the opposite? Do you have scientific studies? Science or God, our friends or foes. So let's use science. Show me your evidence, and then explain to me why every single attempt to validate the truth claims that you're making fails. Everyone has failed. Why is that?
If you would have read my book, I have given the reasons why I wrote that book. Because we live at a time when a God-centered view of life and a spirit-centered view of life has come in for a huge censure and discredit without examining the cases in favor of that stand. And there are hundreds of masters in India, very competent, eminent masters who don't make noise and who are not getting onto a public platform in order to say that they have the truth. And Vedic astrology is a time-tested discipline. It throws light on your destiny, and it helps you to understand who you are in terms of your destiny, not who you are in the spiritual sense, although that is also part of Vedic astrology, but I would not like to go into that here. 2 or 3 days ago, I was consulted by a Ukrainian lady who is now in America, sent me her whole life experiences, and I'm dialoguing with her. An American lady living in Brazil sent me the whole thing. So you got to ask yourself the question, if Vedic astrology is really bunkum, how come that Dr. Sankara is being consulted by so many people, Indians and Westerners from many different parts of the world, in the Middle East, from Australia, from Singapore, from America, from Canada? How come they are coming to consult him? What is the truth in that? Is there any truth which is beneficial? And the truth will certainly be beneficial for those people who are actually seeking that light, who are seeking that truth, and who are in search of the truth. But it will not be beneficial for those people who are onlookers and who have a prejudice against Vedic astrology and who want to beat it with a club. It will not be beneficial for them.
Well, and I want to use this opportunity to also shift things a little towards, again, what we were talking about at the onset of this dialogue, which is the matter of science. And I'll paraphrase, because one of the problems that not one of the problems, the biggest problem in this conversation or any of these types of conversations is the deficiency of vocabulary. People don't cite it enough. It's just like, so when you say evidence, what the actual definition of evidence for most people is material evidence. And if your basis and foundation for a point is that there is an entire existence beyond the material, and that the evidence that you understand for your interpretation of your position lies in there, well, that's a non-starter for a good part of the world. If I can't, then it's not evidence. And so that's the intangible, let's say, is harder to believe.
But then
so,
don't you see, Richard, then that anything goes?
Exactly.
Anybody can say whatever they want.
So that's where I'm going, actually, is that it makes it difficult because what you're asking people to believe is the abstract, the quote-unquote non-provable, which is, again, why I want to bring this back to science. Because at the apex of this particular discussion, I think we'd all agree, are some people who have accomplished more and and although the intelligence of the two people sitting here is at the highest percentile on this planet, but men like Einstein, and again, I was going to paraphrase Max Planck, who, when receiving the Nobel Prize for Physics for his work on the atom, and I'm paraphrasing, said that, you know, as a man of science who has devoted his entire life to the research of the atom, I can come to one conclusion, to the research of matter, I can come to only one conclusion. There is no matter. The atom is empty, and the only thing that I can surmise scientifically is that there is an underlying intelligence, intelligent design, that is at the foundation of everything that exists on this planet, and this is where he coined the phrase, the matrix. And so this is my point, when the only out, it seems, for these intangible, non-material arguments that are sometimes made on this side seemingly get supported when you start to get into things like the unified field theory, or these types of things where, at least from a scientific perspective, because quantum physics doesn't make sense in the material sense. It's literally an abstraction. You can be here and there at the same time. So it gets into a world that's closer to here, and that's why I'd like to know your position on when we get subatomic, where things get crazy, as Einstein talked about. Is that not a place to maybe re-examine these intangibles to see if, whatever, forget the word God, let's throw that out. Let's throw out source, whatever. That whatever some underlying field might be something that we don't understand well enough, but might have some source of creativity and intelligence.
Well, it can't be intelligent. That underlying field, whatever it is, and Planck's idea and quantum mechanics idea is just redefining what matter is. Matter is real. If you doubt it, kick your toe against this table. There are force fields, and the electrons are bound with these forces of nature. So matter is something that at our level, at macroscopic level, is a very real thing. If it turns out at the subatomic level it's not, things never are the same. You know, water is liquid, right? But is an H2O molecule liquid? No, you wouldn't talk about the individual molecule having the same properties as the collection of molecules. So matter is a collection of subatomic particles, and at that level, logical level, we talk about matter as having solidity to it. But still, he used the word evidence in his books, and he's used the word evidence tonight. And if he's going to argue for the truth of a proposition that there is some sort of immaterial world, and in your writings you go back and forth between, you don't seem too consistent. You say the spiritual plane, and then sometimes you say the spiritual sphere, as if there were a difference between a plane and a sphere, whatever that's supposed to mean. But your reply to my question did not actually give us any evidence, nor did you reply to my statement
we are still exploring
about science. What science is observation. Science observes. It builds models and tests them, and it either keeps them or discards them, right? And some models have been discarded. For example, the ether. The ether was considered a valid scientific model for many years, because if light is a wave, it has to propagate through something. So the word ether was invented until Einstein came along and showed that no, there is no, he proved it by observation. You remember that famous experiment with the eclipse of the sun, that there is no such thing as the ether. We still have the word ethereal, which means non-physical. So science is observation. Science is looking, testing. And when you do look with your eyes and with controlled double-blind experiments and test the claims that your religion makes, when you do that, when you use simple science, it's not rocket science, it's not astrophysics, it's just basic survey science. When you look at the claims of the predictions made by Vedic astrologers, they make the claims, you make claims. And by the way, your answer, the people contacting you, how many people have contacted you if it wasn't true, that's like asking, why do so many people buy lottery tickets, right? They're not all going to win, but they keep buying them, thinking that there's some value there. People are contacting you because they want to buy that lottery ticket.
No, they benefited. They're benefited.
They benefited in some way.
They're not going to spend their money for some tinsel show.
Well, people buy lottery tickets, they benefit because
No,
they feel like they're
there's no
participating
jackpot here for them to buy a lottery ticket.
in the chance that they might win the lottery.
What is the lottery here? There's no lottery here. What are you talking
There's the
about?
lottery. There's no evidence for the existence of a God, and yet people are reaching up out of their situation, contacting so-called holy men, as if you have some kind of answers that's unavailable to the rest of us. So answer my question about the scientific fact of the failure of Vedic astrologer predictions. Please answer that question.
Yeah, I'm answering. Vedic astrology gives you self-knowledge. It gives answers to the enigmatic questions of life for which you have no answers. It gives a consistent model of divinity and your life, and how the divinity has got a presence in your life in terms of 9 cosmic, benevolent and malevolent life energies. And for those people who are bogged down at a certain point in life, they have a stasis, nothing is working for them. So they've got a huge number of questions as to why this has happened. And the question for them is, how long is this crisis going to last? When is the veil going to lift? And Vedic astrology gives the time frame. It says this transit affliction will last another 3 months. And this subperiod will last another 3 months. And then, can I avert what is on the cards of fate? Most certainly. That's the power of Vedic astrology.
And just to sort of interject quickly there too, obviously in the 20th century and beyond, astrology has been marginalized to the, to the sort of section of the paper that you read and hope, oh, I'm Taurus. And
In the
whatever.
Western world, yeah.
However, having said that, and as you very well know, historically it was the highest regarded science for many a century, and going back into Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, and beyond, the study of the stars and their effect on the human condition was actually a very highly regarded science.
But he doesn't say that the stars have an effect on the human condition. He says you can read the stars in the same way that you can read God's plan. According to what you read, you don't say that the planets affect our lives.
No.
And I
Well,
know that.
you would be able to explain what is
yeah.
your definition then of Vedic astrology?
Yeah, my definition of the horoscope is what was already there in Vedic astrology thousands of years ago. Vedic astrology is 10,000 years old. The Vedas are 15,000 years old. And the definition is that the horoscope is the mood of the supreme intelligence of the cosmos at the time and place of birth. Now this is like a seminal mood of God or the supreme intelligence of the cosmos. It has got both benevolent as well as malevolent consequences for the whole tenure of your life. Benevolent as well as malevolent. And it's very much similar to the initial conditions of a differential equation. If you have an initial condition of a differential equation and you crank out the solution of the differential equation, it comes out as a graph. And you then start tuning the initial conditions, you will find that the graph jumping and is taking different geometrical shape. So similarly, the seminal mood of God at the time and place of birth is like the initial condition. So if God is simultaneously benevolent and also malevolent. By God, I mean the supreme intelligence of the cosmos, which is the father and mother of the whole of creation. And to the Hindus, this is so easy to understand.
So is there,
I'll come to it.
and so I think that's, I don't want to spend the entire time on Vedic astrology specifically. I think most people are here, about the sort of bigger questions and whether as they relate to science or whether there's a God or no God, which is ultimately where we're always going to come back.
But it is a testable hypothesis. If you're talking about science, you need something to sink your teeth into.
So I just want to say to that, because one of the things I think is also not talked about enough is the terrible track record of science. I mean, we talk back about science as dogmatically as some religions, and even worse. Yet, all we've ever been is wrong in science. I mean, if we're going to look at this through the history, that everything we've ever thought, scientifically or medically, has ultimately been proven incorrect and revised once we knew more And so my question to you, to both of you about that, is how on earth could we ever be comfortable with absolutism on, how could anyone sit here and say anything absolute? When all we know is that to this point, whether it be the sun, whether it be the earth being flat, whether it being how old the universe is, the Big Bang, every single thing we've ever believed scientifically has been right for a temporary period of time until our knowledge base was increased. Why then would we be so confident then in the scientific process?
Okay, first let me correct a mistake you made. Vedic astrology is not 10,000 years old. The Vedas themselves are only a little more than two millennia.
No, that's not right.
Astrology,
Source, perhaps? Or?
That's not right.
astrology only came to India with the Greeks. Before
Not at
the
all.
Greeks, there was no astrological
Not at
system.
all. The Greeks took it from India. Not at all.
You got it wrong. The Greeks introduced it to India.
Not
Before
at
that
all.
time, I challenge you historically.
That
on
is why
question.
Columbus was seeking India, because India is the home of every kind of heritage, intellectual heritage.
Well, you're historically wrong about that.
I have a feeling Wikipedia might have something
Well,
to do with this.
Okay, but to answer your question, no scientist takes an absolutistic position on anything.
Well, I would strongly disagree
Well,
with
maybe
that.
okay, maybe three do. Okay, but in general, what scientists do, and you know this, is they test a hypothesis or a model to a certain level of confidence, and when it gets up to what 95, 97, the repeated experiments, then they say we're going to go with it. We're going to round it up. No one says we have 100% absolutistic or 0% either. Right? In fact, no atheist would say there's a 0% chance of a God. We're rounding it down.
Sure.
So, but notice that when science is improved, how is that done? It's done with science. Science doesn't overturn as much as it builds upon. So Newton had a good idea, but it was incomplete. Science did not overturn Newton. Scientists said, Newton, you were wrong because it wasn't the whole picture. Science built upon with more science. Science is inherently self-correcting. Religion is not.
But sir, that would be actually then the basis of my question. Is there a possibility, or could you be open to, if we're acknowledging that science is incomplete and we haven't seen the big picture, that at some point, through the revision of the scientific process itself, that it could ultimately reveal that, holy mackerel, as it turns out, there's clearly not randomness in this universe, and that it was completely designed at some sort of level. Could you foresee a time where science or you could see that being revealed as the final conclusion?
Yes, every atheist that I know is open-minded. Every atheist that I know, except informally, will round it off. For example, I'm sure that neither of you believe in the existence of leprechauns. Although there's evidence for leprechauns, you can't disprove the existence. You know what leprechauns are?
I don't know.
The little
The Irish Lucky Charms,
the little people in Ireland
magically
with
delicious.
it, you know. So we cannot disprove it. We have to honestly say there is a possibility that leprechauns or elves, we all say that. I think it would be fascinating. I would love to know if there's leprechauns. I'd love to know if there's a God. But we all feel comfortable saying informally, there's no leprechauns. You know, if you want to push me against the philosophical wall and make a strong case, all right, I'm 99.2% convinced that there's no leprechaun, right? That's how science works. Science is always open. More evidence could lower that to 91% or to 83% or lower than 50%. We're always open to revising. That's the beauty of science, is that we don't know things. That's what drives science, is the fact that we don't know and we can continuously correct. Any scientist in the world would love to find evidence for a God. A scientist would win the Nobel Prize for showing, we've got it, folks. After all these millennia, we've got the evidence. Why has that not been done? Why has the scientific community not come forward? It would change medicine. It would change everything if that were true. So far, the scientific consensus is that not that there's no God, but that there's not enough confidence even to think that we should even round any direction on the question.
For that, let's defer to an actual scientist too on that, and who also, again, Vedic astrologer, Hindu spiritualist, but let's not forget, a theoretical physicist. So you have been on both sides of that fence.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Richard Garner. So we have got to first of all understand what is science and what is religion in order to see if they have concurrent goals or they have goals which are divergent. They have goals in different directions. Science is basically a systematic understanding of sensory knowledge. What the eyes see, what the ears hear, what the nostrils smell, what the tongue tastes, what the fingers touch. So we've got these 5 senses, and there's a huge amount of data streaming into the brain through all these 5 senses, and we've got to take the complete gamut of this data and fit it into a very cogent picture to see if we can get a simple and consistent picture of what the world is like. That's what science is. So science is outward looking. It looks out. It looks at nature because it looks through the senses. And the essence of religion, if we go to the genesis of religion and how religion was born, religion is inward looking, all the religions. So you discover the depth and the bedrock of religion by meditating, by being in solitude, by doing penance, by profound introspection, by going into yogic samadhi. Those are the journeys that take you to God or Godhead. You don't search for God in the outside world, in flora and fauna, in the galaxies, because this is an outward search. You might find a reflection of God in the galaxies, in the planets, in the flora and the fauna, 2 million species and so on, but the real home of God is in your heart. As the Master Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. And this is what the Hindu religion has been saying for 10,000 years, and you've got to get there. And now I want to give a metaphor to take this dialogue further, how we continue on this journey, and how should one proceed further on this journey if one is interested in fathoming and unraveling this question at all. Now, let us think of a river, and let us think of an initial bank and a final bank. And the river is the river of our sensory perceptions, our cravings, our anger, our delusions, all the obstacles which come in the way of going back home. And home is on the final bank. So we have to ford through this river, we have to wade through this river, and the scriptures were born on the yonder bank. And on this bank, the initial bank, we have a common sense, a space-time, a matter-energy worldview with which we are functioning, which we see in the newspapers, with which we talk to each other in the marketplace. And the worldview on the yonder bank is an altogether different worldview. It differs from this in that it is incommensurate with this worldview. Incommensurate is the word. There is nothing in common between this and that. Thomas Kuhn, the author of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, has used the word paradigm shift to describe the transition from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, from Newtonian mechanics to relativistic mechanics, and from classical mechanics to quantum field theory. It's a paradigm shift. So you won't even understand the language. You won't, all the fundamental variables which constitute the substance of our conversation, they are wholly different. So you've got to learn the vocabulary, the new vocabulary, the new principles. And you can get that only by actually going over to that shore. Now, for those people who are actually not able to make the journey and go over to that shore, they have to begin the journey by believing, by having trust, and by having faith in the writings and the revelations which the mystics, the sages, and the saints have given us, because that is the corpus of every religion. And the religions are born on the yonder shore. They are not born from space-time perceptions. They are not born from perceptions in the workaday life. I'm going to my office one day and I saw God in the sky. That's not the thing. So one has to actually undertake this journey. And the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, 174 Yoga Sutras, give you a systematic methodology and a journeying process so that every obstacle which is there is surmounted in a step-by-step fashion, because you got to surmount the obstacles. It's like Columbus coming and landing in America. The journey was not easy.
Yeah.
And only Columbus came to America. The whole of Spain and Portugal did not come to America. So it was a one-man discovery. So likewise, every individual will have to take this undertaking, and he'll have to go on this journey. Those who are not prepared, who are too much engrossed in material life, who are fully in a sensate world, they will have to merely believe if they want to believe. If they don't want to believe, they can negate God, and God can be a closed book for them. They have an option. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, he says, he's teaching Arjuna, he gives a very beautiful sutra where there's an option for atheism. Nyayam yattat pravakshyami yat jnatva mritamashnute anadimat param brahma nasat tannasa duchyate. That is, now I will talk to you about what is the goal of the human life, by attaining which you become immortal, you transcend time, you jump out of time. That's immortality. So when the body perishes, you still know that you have not perished with the body and you are separate from the body. And that source is Parabrahma. And what is the nature of the Parabrahma? You cannot say that it exists, and you cannot say that it does not exist. Two options are given. You cannot say that it exists. Why? Because I cannot take Mr. Dan Barker by the hand and say, Mr. Barker, please come with me, we'll go to Grand Canyon, and God is tucked away in a very small cave which nobody knows, which only I know, so please come with me, I will take you there and I will show you the face of God. Because this is not a demonstrable thing. Each one has to discover for himself through the journey which I mentioned, the yogic journey.
Which is, ultimately, it's interesting because it is chicken and the egg. And for a lot of people, it's, okay, well, why would I believe if I don't know? And so I can see the frustration in a straightforward thinking way. There needs to be, and this could be conditioning, this could be just how we were brought up, the lottery of birth, where we were brought, what we read, what our parents told us, as to why we might be more open to responding to blind faith. But I'm interested in your experience, and we're probably going to wrap in about 5 minutes and take questions, because we talked about you being on two sides of the fence as a theoretical physicist, as well as a Hindu spiritualist and a Vedic astrologer. But this trajectory that you've taken in your life, which I think Dr. Sankara pointed out quite correctly, is quite courageous, because you were as deeply devout a Christian as there could be, and yet you were able to see beyond that and are now as far on the opposite as you could possibly be. Is there any part of you that, whether you're lying awake at night, and I'm asking both of you actually, that, beyond the debates, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're looking at the ceiling, and doubt creeps in about the position you're in currently, and says, maybe, I don't know, is there Potter, was I right the first time, or does that ever happen? Is there still a percentile of doubt that exists about the position? And I ask you the same.
That used to happen when I was going through that process, of course, because I was such a strong believer.
Yeah.
So you don't throw that away lightly,
Sure.
right? Today, that never happens. Although intellectually, I will be honest enough to admit that I am open.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are leprechauns. But you and I both know there's no leprechauns, right? So intellectually, I'll say perhaps,
Sure.
perhaps there is a God. But many of us know there's not. There's not a God. The evidence for God is not sufficient. To your analogy about the river, I'm on this shore and I'm looking over at that shore. This shore is my home. This shore gives me happiness. This natural world that we live in now, to me, it's beautiful, it's awesome, it's wonderful. I don't need some promise of something else above and beyond. I love being a puny biophysical animal in a natural environment. You wrote that as a put down, I think, that we're somehow more than just animals.
course.
There's about 1 billion people on this planet, hundreds of millions of people on this planet, who do not believe in a God and don't care. We're not looking across at the other shore. That, to us, that's somebody's imaginations. That, you know, and so I guess a question I have for you, besides pointing out that not all of us share that yearning that you think is so universal, the human race. We love this world that we have. It's real, it's tangible, and it's, you know, and of course there are concepts and there are, you know, we might talk about metaphysics, but it still all boils down basically to material world. But I'm still looking for real evidence here, and you said there's another sphere or another spiritual world. And in your writings you talk about those of us who have been infected with the English Western paradigm, I suppose, are spiritually blind. That's the word that you used in your writings. We are spiritually blind. So since you're skirting the issue of real evidence in the real world, then I would ask you then, and as you encouraged us earlier to be clear about our definitions, you're using that word spirit. I would like to ask you to define the word spirit. What is a spirit and how does it differ from nothing at all? For example, most definitions of spirit tell us what it is not. Yeah. Intangible, non-corporeal, ineffable, you know what I mean, immaterial, you know. So I don't want to know what it's not. I want you to tell me what spirit actually is. Like, what is the ether? And how would somebody be spiritually visionary or blind? What is the mechanism for gathering that evidence if you can't even define the word itself?
That's so simple, Dan. Obviously, the spirit cannot be a piece of matter. It cannot be molybdenum or uranium. Now, you are that spirit, not as the body, go slowly, not as the body. Now, not even as your thought, because your thought is like a string which is wrapped around a central axis in your consciousness. The central axis is the I.
But what is it? I'm asking what it is.
You mean materially?
No, even in any way, how would it differ
from
nothing at all?
That is God, that I is God.
But what is it? What is it? What is the ether?
If you can't demonstrate it. Go slowly. Now the question, what is it? What is this a soda bottle and what is this Edusho chocolate? Presupposes that you want it to be, you want the object of your search to be an object. But this is the supreme subject. It has always been the supreme subject. It can never become an object. Get hold within yourself from the time you remember clearly your life from the age of 3 or so, right up to your 60th year. Something in your life has never changed. That is the true Dan Barker. That is the true Sankara. That is the true Richard Garner. That is the true every human being that is timeless, that was not born, that will not perish, that is the Atma, that is the spirit. Okay. And that has to become clear to you.
So before we go to questions, let me ask then, if we can describe this sense of the self, like Douglas Hofstadter has just tried to do in his new book.
Exactly.
If we can describe the idea of consciousness in the self in purely naturalistic terms, without referring to anything supernatural, and we can, yes we can, consciousness as the functioning of a biological organism, of a brain that builds analogies and models within itself. If we can do that without recourse to anything transcendent.
Why would you want to describe it when you know what it is? Because you are that.
But I change. When my brain changes, I change.
Go slowly. Your thoughts change. You don't change.
Yes, I do. I actually change. There's no central core to me.
Okay, then wait.
There is no central core that is changeless.
Okay,
no.
Then you have not struck ground with the central axis.
There's no central axis.
Because the seeker in Hindu India is one who is in search of himself. Because the self is God.
Well,
and if you actually get at that self, and that self is like a slate, and every thought is a writing on that slate. Every feeling is a writing on that slate. And the self is a witness. For example, you have an emotion, you have a feeling, you have a thought, you have a perception, and you're aware of what has transpired in consciousness. A certain insight has come, and a certain perception has come, and you have perceived it. You are the perceiver, and you cannot know the perceiver as an object. The perceiver is the final destination, and he has not changed from the time you were born.
That's a philosophical position
It's
that many
not.
people disagree with, and is not evidence for the substance or the existence of a subject or an object that you would call a spirit. When you use that word spirit without defining it in any real ways, you may as well just say blah, blah, blah.
No.
You're not defining
Go
it.
But
slowly,
I
slowly.
would say that's, I agree that this is probably subjective. Nobody's going to move off that particular position. But what I would say in finality of this particular conversation, again, sort of under the header of science and God, or not God, is those, and why, again, I think we were intrigued about this particular subject matter. Because the place that I've heard most of these abstractions, which I think we would agree are abstractions, and this is your main position about the lack of validity, tangibility, whatever it is, of these types of, you are the creator and the created, and these types of things which people cannot reconcile with, because you're saying you're black and white, up and down at the same time. And that's really the problem when you start to get into, as you said, the supernatural. But it's funny, because where I've heard these types of terms recently have only been in the field of science, when talking about string theory and talking about places where there is no time, there is no space, there is no end or beginning to the universe. It's always been, and even beyond the Big Bang, what was there before. And I don't think anybody would disagree that there can't have been nothing, because nothing is something. So it's interesting to me, that's why I find that there's this odd overlap here, because for a long time these things that were again seen as sort of the problem with this particular position were the abstractions, the up and the down, seem to be more prevalent these days, again, in quantum physics, string theory, etc. Do you believe, at least scientifically, that there is this place beyond the material where there's no beginning, no end, no time, no space? And if that exists, as many top scientists believe, is that maybe what, quote unquote, these people are talking about, and giving it names and giving it descriptions and sort of making it into a person or whatever it is, because there's no full understanding or grasp of what that is?
They're putting a label on a question mark. It's the question marks that drive science. If there were no unanswered questions, we would have no more science. The beauty of science is that it can continue to address questions that are unanswered. It is intellectually irresponsible to simply jump to a conclusion. It begs the question to say, we have a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding at the present time about science, therefore God. Historically, we have seen those gaps close. In the north, they saw lights in the sky and they heard noises and they said, what is that? Before they knew anything about electricity or weather, they said, that's Thor. Or in the south, they said, it's Zeus. That's what some agency of. But now that we have a better built upon understanding of weather and electricity, those gaps have closed, those gods have died, and your God will die when more gaps close. That's the history of science. As these gaps close, your beliefs, which you haven't been able to define, which you haven't been able to provide actual evidence for that we can look at, that gap will close, and we human animals are going to uncreate that God. That's my position.
Yeah. As an individual, and you say that you are a mere biological, physical organism, you are entitled to any worldview of your choice. Now, that does not become a universal worldview. It just is your worldview. And I come from India, where millions and millions of people have the worldview which I'm placing before the table. And we know that finding God is a lifetime affair. You don't find God by reading the Bible or by taking the rosary and saying for 15 days you do the telling of the rosary and you're not going to find God. It's a lifetime affair. It's given, this connection is given to the mystics, to the prophets, the saints, and the sages. They are the blessed ones. The rest of humanity will have to go in a very systematic way. And even for them, everybody doesn't get the calling. Everybody doesn't want to go to the other shore. Those who want to go to the other shore will seek a master. The master is the boatman, the ferryman, because he lives on the other shore and he knows how to ferry you from this shore to the other shore. And in India, for us, it is so obvious that there are very few special kind of people who go back home and who know that they are that source. And we call them great gurus. My guru, Sri Bhagavan, is one such guru. He has the feeling that he is that primal source. Shirdi Sai Baba has that feeling that he is the primal source. Ramana Maharshi has that feeling that he is the primal source. There are a number of these people. And there are huge number of people from the West who are seeking the truth, who want to ford the river, who want to go to the yonder bank. They come to these masters because they're actually searching for the light. They're not believers. They're way beyond the level of belief. They become seekers. They want, and the search will not stop till they get the truth.
Well, perfect way to end, because we will stop it there. I don't know if we've gotten the truth, and yes, we could be at this for a lifetime. Unfortunately, we only had a few hours. I've got to believe there's some questions. I think there's some mics available to pass around, although I have a feeling we can pretty much hear everybody, so I don't know how super necessary that is, but I don't know if they're available, we might as well use them, but oh, there you go, excellent. So yeah, questions, let's start here, sorry, just because you're closer to the audience. Oh, there you go, wherever, yeah, well, sure. Sorry.
Am I on? I'm very on.
And you'll go next, sorry.
Well, my question is more of an experience, and we talked a lot here about the nature of the way the world is, the way it's observed through the senses, as elegantly put. The question I really have, Dan, is towards science is, how does science deal with such things as direct experience in itself? For example, with this particular person, myself, if you would call it that, at one point in time I was walking along down the street, kind of minding my own business, and the mind itself completely disappeared. There was no ability to say to self, mind is gone. There was no ability to say, that's the yard, this is me. There was no ability to separate myself from existence itself. It just was not possible. Within that, there was nothing even to say, don't walk in front of traffic. You could have came up, literally lit me on fire, and I couldn't have said, this is bad. There was no mind there whatsoever to say that there was such a thing. That experience carried on for just a short while, perhaps a minute, but within that, there was no such thing as separation. There was no such thing as duality. It just simply didn't exist. One glimpse of that, it was undeniable what is going on. That direct experience itself, in my own awareness, kind of says it supersedes all. That the direct awareness itself supersedes the science, it supersedes all of the analytical mind. If you can experience without mind, then anything the mind throws up has to be secondary.
Well, I think you make first you make a good point that religion does tend to remove people from their minds. And maybe that's a compliment. I know that you're exactly right, because I've had that experience. I have felt that experience. The elation, the peace that passes understanding, the feeling of interconnectedness and that myself is totally gone. That happens in many or most religions. But what's happening there, and I'm not going to ask you what you might have been smoking or drinking before that point, because it happens with drugs as well. People take certain drugs and the brain is affected. Eating chocolate, making love, laughing at a joke. There's all sorts of things that affect the biochemistry of the brain in many ways through dopamine and in different drugs that give us these feelings and feelings of detachment and so on. Right now, if I wanted to, I'm not going to do it. I could go into that mode as an atheist. I could do that.
It was not per se feeling.
Well, whatever.
There's a difference between experience that way and a feeling.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly.
Well, let me ask this then.
But I haven't answered this question yet.
But I just mean, at the end of the day, a personal experience is going to be very difficult. I would just like to know, is there a threshold where a certain amount of personal experiences similar to the one we just heard would potentially move the scales? Like, let's say all of a sudden millions of people popped up and said, I had that. Is that the type of evidence would we consider that evidence, I guess, even if we personally couldn't measure it?
We would factor that into the equation, but it would tell us more about human nature than it would about a supernatural world.
Sure.
For example, the human brain is very creative, and many things happen in the human brain, and all religions have it. People have seen the Virgin Mary. People have talked with Elvis Presley. I mean, people have had these feelings of, and I've had feelings like what you're talking about when I spoke in tongues in the Pentecostal church. It's amazing. It's powerful. It's life-changing. It gives you goosebumps. But you wake up in the middle of the night. You've had a nightmare. Your heart is pounding. Your palms are sweating. You've screamed. You've woken up the whole house. You've had a powerful, life-changing experience that no one can deny. That nightmare that you had is a very real human experience, and we shouldn't deny it. But there's no boogeyman crawling through the window. You had a very powerful experience, but there's no God out there crawling through the window. It's an experience of your own, in your mind, interpreted your own way.
With all due respect, it wasn't an experience of the mind. It was the experience of the absence of mind. That's the difference between a dream.
But you're calling it an experience.
It's the absence of story and completion.
But you called it an experience. So your animal body.
That's the words.
Yeah, but
That's a definition I would give it one.
so to that point though, I just want to cut it off there because I don't want to get bogged down in something that ultimately is subjective, and regardless, and I'm not marginalizing that, but we're not going to be able to. It is words do escape us, but I do want to. There's a lot of questions, and I'd like to get as many as possible. Sorry.
You did ask for evidence.
Yeah, but my point is but somebody's personal experience. No, we could sit here all night. It's not going to provide the threshold of evidence that he's referring to. So I just don't want to get bogged down in this is my opinion, that's my opinion. If we can't, whatever. And like I said, there's a lot of questions. I agree that it's evidence. All I'm saying is that's my opinion. That's Dan's opinion.
But what's it evidence for?
Well, this is exactly what I don't want to be doing for the next 40 minutes. Is my point.
Dan, what is your evidence that made the turning point for you to say that God did not exist? Having been in a place where you had experiences of His presence within you and around you, at what point did you turn away and say,
I could still do that.
God in your mind defy your understanding?
I can still do that. I can still go into a mode where I'm talking with God. I can still go into speaking in the Spirit. I feel this presence in my brain. I get goosebumps. I can still do that. It's a very real, powerful human experience. It's a natural experience. Our emotions are natural things. Happens in all religions. If my experience of talking to God is valid, then so are the people who talk to Napoleon and to the Virgin Mary and to Allah and to Vishnu and whatever else. It's a mental experience. And in my mind, it was intellectual question. And as I said earlier, the fact that there's no evidence for a God, and this is not evidence for God, it's evidence for creative brain, is what it's evidence for. It's evidence for how our brains work. It doesn't point outside of the brain to anything. Otherwise, there really is a boogeyman crawling through the window.
Would you qualify a statement, though, like that with, in my opinion?
Well, actually, science supports naturalistic explanations for psychological creative phenomena. And you can even measure that through some of these scans. You can even show that what's happening in the brain is a physical thing. And when you take drugs, your consciousness is changed. When you're exhausted, your consciousness changes. So the brain is very creative and very powerful.
You didn't answer my question, though. What turned you away from your original?
The facts. The facts that there's no evidence, there's no good argument. The fact that the Bible is unreliable, unhistorical, and immoral. The fact that there's no agreement among believers as to the nature or moral principles of this God. The fact that there's no good answer to the problem of evil. And the fact that millions of people live good lives without it. Suppose I were to say, I have had a deep personal subjective experience that the universe is completely godless. I do feel that way. I have this complete feeling that it's totally godless, the cosmos is empty. Is my personal subjective experience to count as evidence for atheism? You would laugh me out of this room. You would just say, oh, Dan, you're just having your own psychological experience. You think you're talking with God, but you're talking with yourself.
Well, okay, and again, where there's subjectivity, I'm going to try to keep things moving, but I'd also like, are there any atheists in the house that have some questions for Dr. Sankara, who are also looking to get some enlightenment on that? Sorry, go ahead. And I know you have the microphone, we're coming back to you next, I'm sorry.
So there was talks like intelligent design and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I personally think it's a crock. That's not really important.
Yeah.
Do you put any stock in intelligent design? Do you think that there needs to be any material evidence to speak of to prove, I don't know, the validity of religious belief, or do you
following his question.
So he's saying, do you require evidence that there's actual creation in the grand plan, intelligent design? Is there a requirement for, I don't know, fractal geometry, for instance, as evidence? Are those part of what you require to have the beliefs you have?
No, there are hundreds of ways in which you can see that an infinite conscious intelligence is at work. And for that you must be prepared to have the humility to come to that discovery, not as a belief so that you may emotionally depend on it, but as a result of your inquiry. And you can do that only if you are a paleontologist, if you are an evolutionary biologist, if you are a theoretical physicist investigating quantum field theory and doing modern research, then you may have a chance. But that is a glimpse, because finding ultimate reality is not the right royal road, is never through science. It is a religious experience. You've got to turn inward and you've got to plumb the depths of consciousness and then find the axis in the consciousness, which was not born, which will not die. And that is a universal axis. That axis is the same in the cockroach, in the lizard, in the M27 galaxy, in the prostitute, in the beggar, in the philosopher. That axis is the same, that axis is God. And you've got to make the discovery. Just because somebody else makes the discovery and expresses it in words, you can't even take refuge in it. It's worth its while only if it's an authentic first-hand discovery made by yourself, and it will take time. We are not having like a fast food shop. We are not having a thing whereby you will attend for 2 weeks and then, boy, you got it all. No.
The woman with the microphone, please, and Lakshmi.
Okay, and thank you for this presentation, Richard.
Thanks.
I do want to deal with facts. I think we need to deal with facts, and I'm going to lay it out and then maybe ask a question starting with Mr. Parker. So I completely agree. We are animals. Like animals, we take birth and then we die. We give birth and keep the human race going. Stephen Hawking said that we are like computers. When there is no electricity or hard drive, or when the hard drive is taken out, we are dead, just like computers, with an exception. And the exception is that the only thing that he finds close to so-called concept of God is laws of nature. He could not find an explanation for the laws of nature. So the mystery is this, and I've actually, over my lifetime, crossed over, like sometimes I was Dr. Sankara and sometimes I was Mr. Barker during my lifetime. So the mystery that I live in is this. There is an environment around us that we live in with its own set of laws. We are part of this environment without which we cannot exist. Our body is following a set of principles. We are energy that seems solid when it is not. There is no matter. It is proven that by science that we are all energy. We have experienced that sometimes when we least expect it, the solutions arrives in the form of theory of relativity or the transfer of electrons. Theory came through another scientist. There's an experience of witness, which is supported by double slit experiment, because as soon as a witness arrived, an external witness arrived, there was a shift, as I'm sure you're all aware of the double slit experiment. So the point that I'm trying to make is that although I completely agree with Mr. Barker that we are animals, but then there is this mystery exists, the mystery of these laws that are around us, without this environment, that we cannot live. So who has designed it? Is this completely random? Thank you.
That is a good question, and that is a valid question for cosmology. And cosmologists admit there's still a lot of gaps. But historically, we know that most gods are gods of the gaps. And what happens when those gaps close? What happens 10, 20, 40 years from now when those cosmological questions, we now know that the initial constants were not fine-tuned. We now understand that there was no variation within those, whatever. whatever it comes up to, what happens when those gaps close. But I think what your argument might be suggesting is we have a mystery, therefore let's answer it with another mystery, which doesn't answer anything. Let's just stop at the level where we have the question and resist that temptation to plug the gap with Thor or Allah or whatever, because, as Richard Dawkins has pointed out many times, like in The Blind Watchmaker, if there is an intelligent designer that put all this together, who, if you have to explain, as your question said over there, which he really failed to directly address, if you need to explain complexity and functional complexity by a designer who put all that together, isn't the mind of that designer also complex? Isn't the mind of that designer, it has to be at least as complex as the thing that it made. So what you're doing is you're trying to explain complexity with more complexity, which means you've explained nothing. It would be more honest to say, we don't know, rather than to say, well, I'm going to plug that gap with my idea that there's a being. The only mechanism we have so far of explaining the opposite, of how complexity can arise, not from more complexity, but how complexity can arise from simplicity, is evolution. If there were a God, that God would have had to have evolved itself. If your premise is true, that complexity requires a designer, then a complex designer requires a designer, and that's an argument ad infinitum. You may as well stop. It's turtles all the way up or turtles all the way down. So let's be honest as scientists and say, this is great. There are some questions that we don't have answers for, and resist that temptation to plug it with a particular deity from a particular continent on a particular planet going around the sun.
Or a particular science.
But science is not plugging the gap yet. Science is waiting.
Yeah, no, but my point is that works both ways when we're saying, because what I would love, I agree wholeheartedly. I can't believe we spend as much time and energy on this planet pretending that we know anything. Like, I really can't believe it. Like, we know so little, obviously, that it's comical. And yet we sit around and we talk to each other like we know when the universe was created. Oh yeah, it was 10 billion years ago. Yeah, we measured some stuff around a planet. Oh, it's at now 14 billion. On the same way, we talk about, oh, there's a guy in the sky, and Adam and Eve, whatever. The bottom line is, on either side, why could we just not admit we have no idea and just be comfortable with that? And I say that to both people. Yeah. Yet there's this human desire to believe we have answers to things we can never have answers to. And that isn't sufficient, it seems. And and I'm not saying we shouldn't have any more debates, because these are fun, but I'm just saying, like, it's comical to me how anybody can suggest even that we have the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, when this planet is the size of an atom of an atom of an atom inside of a galaxy that's the size of, you know what I'm saying? Like, why are we pretending we know shit?
We do know a lot.
But we only know it temporarily, like you said, until we know more. And again, I think theology as well as science are equally vain attempts to ultimately tell ourselves that we know stuff we can't ever imagine knowing.
I take issue with that.
Okay.
I think religion is the vain attempt. Science is the humble attempt. Science says we don't know. Let's withhold judgment. Let's not plug the gaps until we have enough level of confidence to come up and say that we have that level of confidence. We do know, for example, that within the observable universe, the inverse square law of gravity is a fact. That works. We can send rockets to Jupiter and whatever.
Sure.
We just had a planetary probe exit the solar system. Just this month. There are some things that we do know. We don't pretend that we know everything, and we may never know anything. But if you're going to have a model of how the world works and you test that model repeatedly, and unlike the idea of the ether, that model continuously is supported by repeated testing, then we can say with high level of confidence, not with absolute arrogant certainty, scientists can say, all right, we're going with this until we're proved wrong. We might be wrong. All scientists say that. In fact, any scientist worth his or her salt would love to prove a previous theory wrong, and that's how science moves. So science is humble about it. Science is self-correcting. Science says we've been wrong in the past, we might be wrong in the future, but let's do the best we can with repeatable, logical, falsifiable
Sure.
methods of observation.
I would just suggest they get a better PR agency, because the overall idea that they're humble about the lack of absolutism is not something that's very well communicated. I believe theoretically that's true. I don't hear it a lot. That's all I'm saying. I don't hear it a lot. Anyways, a couple more questions before we have to wrap. Sorry, yes, go ahead. Is this a follow-up, or
It's
is
a
this?
second, she's asking you a second question.
Doesn't have full proof of zero existence of consciousness either. So
No,
you
no,
don't
he
have
mentioned
full
that.
proof. Okay.
Yeah, and he acknowledged that. Fair enough. Sorry, did you ask a question yet? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That girl wants to ask.
Yeah. Oh, microphones? Oh, it does work. Okay. So my question is really simple. It's not that difficult. And it's for Dan Barker. Yes. So my question is that we have all this knowledge of science, and we have this knowledge of the imaginable dragons and leprechauns and whatnot. So, but like imagination is entering into a realm that supersedes the corporeal world. So for us to get this knowledge, there has to be a starting point. It doesn't just come to us from nowhere. We don't just it has to have some sort of source. But my question is to you that science has, proven a lot of things, and but religion has filled in that gap of the things that we don't know. So why is it that you are turning away from it when there is actually more evidence pointing towards the existence of God through, for example, the Bible and like the Hebrew scriptures, and for example, in the Quran, so why? Sorry, I'm really nervous.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, so why would you turn away from religion when all this evidence is pointing otherwise? And we have that knowledge is supposed to have some sort of starting point. And yeah.
Do you want to answer? Do you feel you have answered that, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, we're not talking about the Bible tonight, but the Bible is a big part of my transformation. The Bible is not a reliable source of information. The Bible and the Quran are internally contradictory. They have historical anachronisms within them. They were thrown together in a very sloppy way. They are unscientific in many ways. They are very bad guides for moral behavior. We don't need those books. We can do a better job. If the Bible is evidence for God, then God is a bumbler. God is an evil maniac, if that's what the Bible is for, because the God of that Bible committed mass genocides. The God of that particular book had such a big ego that if you don't bow down and kiss his feet on one day a week, he's going to kill everybody and stone them to death. I've preached out of every book of the Bible. I've translated the Bible. So you are offering. Excuse me, you are interrupting. Can you stop?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, we're going to let people speak. Yeah.
Sorry, I can only take so much.
Well,
You can only
I
take
hear
so
you.
much truth. I
No,
suppose.
no,
But let me answer her question.
Let's keep it civil.
I have read the Bible.
It's never intended to be read literally.
But no.
Exactly.
But hey,
Exactly.
If you read it literally, of course it doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
this is
But the consciousness.
this is bordering on inconsiderate now.
I need to
So
finish
and
answering
I'm
her
just going to
question.
stop you right there before we continue. It's an emotional subject, but we have to be adults here. I mean, we're trying to have. Everybody wants to jump up and whatever. We can't do that. And the idea about if we're going to sit and debate the Bible and whether it was literal or whether, how many people here know that the New Testament was written about 350 years after Jesus Christ died?
No, that's not true.
It wasn't? When was it written? The New Testament?
The New Testament was the earliest documents were about 30 years, 40 years.
No, but the Council of Nicaea and
Put it together,
Put
yeah.
it together, and they threw out what they didn't like, and they kept what they liked. Is
but
my point.
The initial writings were earlier than that.
But all I'm saying is, if we're going to try to get into whether Bibles are historical documents and valid for whatever, and then we're also going to say that they can't be taken literally, I think we're just going down a track that already has shined enough subjective light on it.
Except that her question offered the Bible as evidence for God.
And that's what I'm
and
saying.
I'm countering her.
Yes.
Her claim is false.
And
this fellow who interrupted us
Yes.
so impolitely is correct that the Bible should not be read literally, and that was part of my metaphor, my change, my
Yes.
metamorphosis, was that the prodigal son is a fiction, Adam and Eve were metaphors, and God himself is a fiction. God himself is a character within a book that is not to be taken literally. That was part of my chant. The Bible is not evidence for a God.
Probably where you were getting on your point.
That was where I was going to.
Okay, let's keep it controlled here. I don't know where we're going here. Yes, sir.
Okay, I had two simple questions. One is for Mr. Dan Barker and one is for Sankara. The first question comes to Mr. Dan Barker. Please
Yep.
kindly answer to me in a polite way in perspective play. Can you tell me who are you? Don't tell me your name, because your name is given by your parents for the identification, for the signature. Please now tell me who are you? The second question to Mr. Dr. Sankara. Sir, please tell me, is any God was existing before 4,500 billion years ago? Please answer to my both questions. Thank you.
Let's start here.
Yeah, your question is actually ill-posed, because if God is the primal cause of creation, sarvakarana karanam, then he is outside of time. So the attachment of a chronological window to him of whether it is 450 BC or whether it is 4 billion years or 40 billion years is totally irrelevant. It makes no sense.
Can I ask you a quick question there as well? Do you think it's problematic to A, anthropomorphize whatever we're talking about, but also B, using continuously, as we have historically, using the word him? Like, if we're so, you know, if it's above, below, it's a man, it's a, you know, it's beyond, why do we continue to use the descriptor, the male descriptor, when we're talking about God?
Good question. Because man has got his limitations and his conditioning. It's very tragic that he is able to think of this transcendental source only in human terms.
Yes.
That's a tragedy.
Yes.
So, and because probably it was a male-dominated society, and males held more power.
Yeah.
So, and God was a seat of power. So you brought in the pronoun him.
Sure. Do you think if we used things like the source, like
People
it,
are
and like
using
whatever,
people
yeah.
are using these words.
Yeah. And for you, who are you?
I exist because my mother and father fell in love and had sex. And their genetic material was recombined randomly. My brothers don't look a lot like me. And my mother and father exist for the same reason. I am the product of a long, successful line of successful ancestors through evolution. I am a biological human animal. That's who I am.
Till 10? The I am presence. Yes, you, sir. Sorry. Oh, sorry, you'll be next. Sorry. Go ahead.
Hopefully a quick question to Dan Barker. Who do you think is closer to the truth, or who sympathize more? The person who is atheist due to the ideological background he's submerged to, or the person who believes, who belongs to, who is a religious person, but he arrived there through his own experience and his own research of what's inside him and what's in the world outside of him?
Yeah, I don't know if that question is apt. It's a good question, but when you use the word the truth, as if truth were a thing, you know what I mean? Because
Yes.
the word truth is simply a label for, in my opinion, in the opinion of a number of philosophers, and some atheists disagree with me, but in my opinion, the word truth is simply a label for how well a statement or a proposition corresponds with reality. If the statement corresponds to a high level of confidence, then we say that's a true statement. If it doesn't, and if you think correspondence is binary, then it's yes or no. So atheism, basically, atheism is not a creed, it's not a doctrine, it's not a moral philosophy. Atheism is not actually not even a worldview. Atheism is simply the absence of theism. Some atheists might actually want there to be a God. It's irrelevant. Some atheists might actually hate the idea of a God. Some of them might, you know what I mean? All of that is irrelevant. Some of us have spent years thinking it through. Everybody's born an atheist. Everybody's born without a belief in a God. No baby has a belief in a God. So technically a baby is atheistic until it's indoctrinated. And there are entire cultures on this planet in which the belief in God never arose. There are tribes in the Amazon where the supernatural and life after death and God don't even exist. It's not a universal human thing. So I don't know if either of those two types of atheists are more closer to the truth. I do happen to know, though, that those of us who fought for our views appreciate them a lot more, I think, than the average run-of-the-mill atheist who simply grew up not believing and doesn't believe. So.
And I want to apologize to the people in the back because I have been skewing towards the front. I know I said you're next, and then somebody in the back, or in the mid-range.
Yeah, basically, yeah, I agree with the guy that Northrop Frye's book, Words with Power, is basically that the Bible is more a foundation for all words to communicate. But basically, Stephen Hawking and Carl Sagan went to see the Pope at the Vatican, and basically they had to consult with him to find out if he would agree that their version was compatible with the Catholic religion, because the Pope said we can believe that there was a Big Bang, and that must have been the creator of the universe. So basically, what you're doing is going back 30 years and to when they were doing it, and you're just starting out the conversation again. Do you think that that you can bring the conversation up to where he is now, where he's talking about being able to, he was on the...
Are we talking about the Pope?
No, Stephen Hawking.
Okay.
Carl Sagan is
Sure.
dead now, and Stephen Hawking is at the point where he was on the Discovery Channel, and he's talking about being able to travel into the future so that they can find out if they're on the right track with string theory.
Yeah. So actually, let me stop you right there. I'm actually I had a Stephen Hawking quote to put out earlier. I didn't have a chance. I regard the brain as a computer, which will stop working when its components fail. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That's a fairy tale story for people who are afraid of the dark. How would you respond to Mr. Hawking?
That is Mr. Hawking's personal opinion. That is not the truth.
Okay. Question in the back. You've had your hand up for a long time. Way in the back. Yes, you. No, you. Yes, you. Okay, you. You're ready to go. Sorry. Okay, so whoever has the microphone, just go.
Yeah. Thanks. I never thought I would see a man of God and a scientist arguing opposite ends of the spectrum. So, wonderful debate, and I'd like to thank the host of this show. Wonderful. I think, Richard, you picked up on the point I was actually going to raise, which was the focus on the human spirit. And really, I think the belief that there is a God is something you feel inside. It's something that's very much internalized, you know. And I'm not quite sure it's something that can actually be proven by science. I mean, science and mankind, well, women as well, in our infinite wisdom, we can't even fix the common cold, yet alone prove there's a God. So I don't think it's something that can be proven through the standard mechanisms of science. But the question I'd like to raise is, when you think about people who've gone through or experienced what we call the near-death experience. Yeah, near-death experience. And the one thing that a lot of them have in common, and this is actually proven, is most typically they refer to God or God help me. Why is that the case? This includes people who are atheists, people who are non-believers. Why is it we always come back to that one common denominator, which is God? if there is no God.
Sure, and I'd like to include in that as well, I'm sure you're familiar with the guy's story whose name escapes me, the neuroscientist who recently had a near-death experience, who was an atheist, I believe, or certainly a man of science, and has written a book, and I know you're familiar with this. So, because I've heard people speak to this as that's still a chemical thing going on. Is that your position on this level of experience?
Well, I did a whole debate with Dinesh D'Souza on that topic, and there's no way we're going to touch it tonight.
Yeah.
But basically, people like Susan Blackmore, who have studied near-death experiences, people like Keith Augustine, who has a wonderful book-length essay online about all of the reports. Susan Blackmore says that what's happening in the mind of a dying patient who's near death tells us what's happening in the mind of the patient. It doesn't tell us anything about death because they haven't died. And what Keith Augustine proves, and I wish we had time to go into this, is that the reports of near-death experiences are not universal like you might think. You may have heard of sort of a composite experience of the tunnel and the light and the life review and the visiting dead relatives and maybe seeing a source of that. Raymond Moody, when he wrote his book in 1975 about that, admitted that was a composite. Nobody actually has that experience. It's a piece from these stories, and they vary by culture. In India, they tend not to see Jesus. They tend to see
obviously
the other Yamraj. They see Yamraj sitting up at a book, sitting up and taking a ledger saying, oh, we've had a clerical mistake, you have to go back. So it's culturally dependent, and if you're raised to believe in Jesus, when you're near death, you're going to see Jesus. If you're a Muslim, when you're near death, you're going to see Muhammad or Allah or whatever, or the 72 virgins or whatever you think you're going to see. So this whole near-death experience thing is overrated. Out-of-body experiences have not been proved yet. In fact, in many cases, they've been disproved.
No, you're talking through your hat.
No, I'm not. I'm looking exactly.
No.
I'm sorry.
You're talking through your hat.
Let me finish.
Sorry.
Yeah. You'll have time to respond.
You can respond when I finish.
Yeah.
They have done controlled experiments, people who have reported things from out-of-body experiences that were untrue. It's more likely, yes, people said, oh, there was playing cards on the table. There were not. Oh, these people talked about this. They didn't. They are more often mistaken by what they're reconstructing through hearing than, in fact, they've even put things above. They're testing near-death experiences right now. They put things that above the level of the doctors to see if anybody can see it. No one has yet reported it. At this point in time, out-of-body experiences have been disproved.
I wanted to talk.
I want to add to that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last year, I was at the Institute of Robert Monroe in the state of Virginia, Charlottesville. I've been in touch with the Monroe Institute for the last 30 years, and I've worked with the Monroe tapes. And I've talked to many people at the Monroe Institute, and Robert Monroe's lifetime's work is Journeys Out of the Body, the first work, and The Ultimate Journey, the second work. That is, you leave the body, and this time you're not coming back. That means you're saying goodbye to planet Earth. So these are seminal works. And the previous avatar of astral projection was also from the Western world. He was Sylvan Muldoon, very well known. And you got to read these works. Your database is too small, Mr. Dan Barker.
So I just, does that bring me to a quick question? Are you familiar with Dean Radin, the Institute for Noetic Sciences?
I'm not.
Started by the Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who we were lucky enough to interview on the One Network. Sixth man to walk on the moon, a man of absolute science. Obviously, if you're an astronaut, you're not a hippie, right? It's the 60s, you're a Navy guy, you're a science guy. He goes to the moon, and on the return trip, sees the Earth in its entirety, and has what he refers to, and the Indian name escapes me, but he has an epiphanal experience. In a way that you're talking about, beyond mind, beyond whatever. Transforms him, literally, as he says, rewires this guy, who is a buzz-cut, hardcore, military science guy. He comes back, and is since, in the last 40-plus years, he started the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which studies all of these phenomenon that you're talking about. And I would just suggest that anybody who wants to get into that, whatever they call it, between whether it's a percentage of chance or into the higher percentiles.
Probabilities.
Yes, and that the studies that they have done around all sorts of parapsychology, out of body, near death, whatever, and the numbers that go beyond the possibility of it being chance are actually quite stunning. And he's, you know, D. Radin's been on some pretty prominent television shows talking about this. So all I would say is the jury is still out on the study there, and maybe it's only limited by the lack of study that's being done on those issues, because as you and I both know, you're not getting tenure at Stanford if you're studying out-of-body experience.
Exactly.
You could.
Exactly.
If you could prove it, you would.
But you know the pressures of,
No,
you know, I'm looking...
if you could prove it, you would get
I like
tenure
to
at
say
Stanford.
Sure, yeah.
I'd like to just add to this. At the Monroe Institute, there is a program called Lifeline. And the program is given by the advanced teachers. There are a whole array of teachers there. And what do? They actually find, when they leave the body and go out, that there are a number of human bundles of consciousness which actually get stuck and which do not travel to the higher planes of consciousness because of their attachments, their sense of sin, and so on. And these Monroe Institute teachers who are explorers on the subtle planes, they go and help them and do the healing and facilitate their upward moment. Now in the Hindu world, you've got to see what is the corresponding work. When somebody dies, there is a whole series of religious rituals performed by contacting the higher planes of consciousness just to facilitate the disconnection with the body, to make the disconnection perfect, so that the consciousness will continue its onward journey. Now this is extremely well known in India. And the Monroe Institute, which is a Western institute, is doing this work now. And I saw a film on that. And Mr. Dan Barker's database is too small.
Okay, I'm sorry we got to leave it there because we're beyond our time. I apologize. There's a lot of great questions, which is a good sign. I would say the use of explorer is a good word, because at the end of the day, we are all explorers, and continue to explore. That's the best thing that I think anybody can say. Try to be as open-minded and non-emotional as you can be, and you're going to have a better chance at arriving at some semblance of real truth. We're going to try to continue to do these events, and whether it'll be here or somewhere else on the U of T campus. But I want to thank Richard at the U of T Multi-Faith Center, Lakshmi Kumar, obviously, our two esteemed guests who sit here patiently and take on questions as well as engage each other. Thanks for everybody here for being civil as well. And yes, check out the onenetwork.ca.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
And like us on Facebook. Sorry.